Hello and welcome to the Wildlife Moto channel. So I think it's probably abundantly obvious what this episode's all about. It's not so much about what I've been doing on the bike, but a little bit of an update about some plans that I've got coming up. So I mentioned this a few episodes ago. I was thinking about changing the air filter and the starter motor cover on my 1981 R100CS. And my reasons for wanting to do that were purely from an aesthetic standpoint, in that I've always struggled a little bit with that big chunky airbox that BMW dropped onto the later bikes, especially when considering how aesthetically pleasing everything was on the earlier classic airheads. When you look at this engine block and the transmission and the starter motor cover and the airbox cover, you're actually looking at 4 different separate parts. But I think BMW did a really great job from a design standpoint back in the day to make everything feel so coherent, so considered. Everything flowed together perfectly. You could tell it came from the same idea, it came from the same minds, it came from the same piece of paper. And the idea was that everything kind of flowed together nicely, despite the fact that they were separate parts. And I just really appreciate that. I think it's a really nice touch. And then we get to 1981, and all of that design ethos, all of that coherence goes completely out of the window as BMW just slap on this great big black chunk onto the back of the bikes. Now, on some of the slightly more modern machines, like the GSs and things like that, I think they kind of get away with it. But on the bikes that were kind of harking back to the old days, so like the Classic Sport, for example, which was really a bit of a throwback bike. In many cases, it was one of the first modern classic bikes because it was a bike looking back rather than looking forwards. And I just always felt that it was a little bit out of place on that bike. In an ideal world, we would have had the classic airbox and the classic rocker box covers included on that bike. But clearly it was a step too far for BMW at the time. So it never happened. We had a classic style bike with the S-style fairing and the S-style cowl, but we weren't going to get any changes to the engine. And I kind of understand why. Those days had gone. And you can imagine all the reasons why BMW had to change the airbox. As we get into the 80s, we're obviously getting more regulation around emissions. There's more pressure on fuel efficiency, and there's going to be more regulation around noise and things like that. So there's a number of reasons why they would have done it. I just don't think aesthetically it was executed in a way that was in line with the look and feel of the rest of the bike. Anyway, so I've decided to make the change. Now, to do it is a little bit more complicated than just going ahead and swapping out your airbox. So the way these guys work is they kind of press together like that. So we have our 2 halves that go together. They sit on top of the transmission. And then we also have a starter motor cover that needs to be in line with this design that then connects up something like that. So we'll go on something along those lines. Now, you've got to do the 2. You can't have just the airbox or just the starter motor cover. They come as a pair and they work together. So in my case, I was not going to be able to reuse my newer style starter motor cover with this airbox, so I had to get both. Now, these starter motor covers are quite interesting, actually. There's loads of different styles of starter motor cover, in that they all have different emblems stuck to the side of them depending on the model bike that you've got. So if you have an R90S, there'll be an R90S logo stuck on the side. It's not permanent. It's kind of on a gluey, sticky thing. They're quite famous for coming off, and as a result, quite hard to find. They're quite expensive to buy those kind of badges that go on the side of these starter motor covers. The vast majority of these starter motor covers had those badges stuck to the side, so you'd have to kind of find, in my case, an R100S badge. I don't think they ever made one with a CS emblem on the side because they'd moved on by then. And the vast majority of these starter motor covers also had a plastic or kind of rubber scoop that was stuck onto the top of them. It was only in 1979, for I believe literally 1 year, that BMW made this version of the starter motor cover. And this version was designed to work with the newer style engine. So the inner timing chest cover with the exposed aluminium fins, it was designed to kind of work with that look and feel. And we don't need to worry about the badges on these newer starter motor covers because we have BMW cast into the side of the unit, so it doesn't have a sticky badge like the older ones did. These are incredibly rare and incredibly hard to find because they were produced for such a short period of time. It actually makes me believe that BMW never really wanted to change the Airbox configuration on these bikes, because they changed the timing chest cover, they changed things like the rocker box covers, they'd gone for their new look, and they designed this starter motor cover to work with that and to work with their original Airbox. So clearly they produced this, and then for a number of reasons, regulation came down upon them and said, you got to change your Airbox to get it through noise and emissions and all that kind of stuff. So all of this went out the window just a few months after being put into production, and we moved on to the Airbox that we see from 1981 moving forwards. So I really, really, really wanted to find one of these, but I never thought I would. I was aware that they existed. I'd seen a few in photos, and I was like, this is the one I want, because this is the one that works best for the rest of the engine components on my bike. And what I would do is paint this kind of inlay here, have the BMW lettering exposed, and have the rest of it vapor blasted. So you can only imagine my absolute sheer joy when I found one of these for sale in absolutely mint condition. And just have a look at what I mean when I say mint condition. I mean, this is from 1979, right? Absolutely spot on. You can see there's a little bit of paint there, so you can see this has clearly been vapor blasted or blasted in some way. So there's just a couple of little spots of paint that have stayed on there. It's not a major problem, because I will probably reapply that paint to the inlay, as I said, and just have the letters popping out like that. So we need that to accommodate the older style Airbox. This piece I bought separately from a different seller, and it's not in as good condition. I mean, it's nothing fundamentally wrong with it. It's just a little bit dirtier, really. It could probably do with being soaked in a bucket of degreaser for a few days and then probably just gone over with a brass brush or something like that. According to the seller, it was vapor blasted about a year ago or something like that, and it's been kind of run ever since then, so it's a little bit dirty. It's picked up a little bit of just grime and things like that from life out and about on the road. But look, this is how this stuff ends up looking pretty damn quickly anyway, so I'm not overly worried about this at all. I think it's absolutely fine. And if we flip round to the back of this clamshell, we can see here that this has the 8 holes in the back of it. This was the design that was used on the more powerful S version bikes, so the R100S, the R100CS, they all had these holes. I think some of the smaller engine bikes didn't have them, and I think even in some of the later models they closed these off again just to try and get around, I think, noise, because there's quite a lot of noise that kind of emanates from the Airbox with these holes, which I don't think is a problem at all. All up for that. But yeah, so again, finding these in good condition can be a little bit challenging. You can expect to pay somewhere between 50 quid for a decent set, and then there's sellers out there asking for hundreds and hundreds of pounds. So you have to shop around a little bit. Keep an eye out for new ones coming onto platforms like eBay. I think Motorworks also sell these as well. So I'm currently waiting, talking to Motorworks, for a bunch of stuff to arrive to install this setup onto the bike. So obviously the first thing we need is the round air filter. It's a paper air filter that I've gone for, not the K&N one. So I've got a paper air filter going in there. There's a big long through bolt that runs through here, long old bolt that connects the two halves of the clamshell together. Then there's a bracket, so a long flat bracket which is bolted to the top of the transmission, and then it has two little prongs that just help to connect this down onto the transmission. And there's another little shim thing as well that we need to get to bolt it onto the back of the transmission. So not a massive amount of hardware. The only other thing I had to get was a different inlet duct for the right hand side, because it's I'm going to reuse my left hand side one from my CS, but I needed to get a different one on the right hand side so that it all connects up to the carburetors okay. And that's just because the cylinders are slightly offset. I will make a full video when it comes to installing this setup, so you'll get to see how it all kind of goes on the bike. I think it's a relatively straightforward procedure. Now, in terms of things like performance, you know, this setup was run on these bikes for many years with no issues. Is there going to be some tuning that might need to be done on the carburetors? Possibly. You know, it's going to be much for a muchness. Some people say these old style airboxes flow air better. Some people say you lose a couple of horsepower with these older style airboxes, but hey, who's counting? It's not really going to be a problem. But I think from an aesthetic standpoint, once these guys are cleaned up, I've also got a nice little blanking plate that's going to go in here because I'm not going to use the choke on here. So a nice little, it's a Moto Works designed blanking plate that has a laser engraved set of horizontally opposed pistons, so the kind of boxer style engine layout just engraved in there. It's a nice little touch. So yeah, I think when it's all cleaned up, all on the bike, it's gonna look fantastic. It's gonna look absolutely brilliant. It's gonna bring this bike back in line with the proper classic style airhead look and feel. I wouldn't have done this if it was like an old GS or something like that. I probably wouldn't have bothered because that kind of rugged look and feel I think works for those bikes. But if you're trying to do something that, you know, celebrates the best of the airheads, then I think this is the way to go. So Airbox conversion inbound on the channel very soon. And yeah, we've got plenty of other bits and pieces to get on with in the meantime. So this has been a little bit of a distraction, but I'm just really pleased that I managed to find all the parts that I needed to get the job done. And hopefully it all goes smoothly. Right, that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching. And until the next one, ride safe.